welcome to TMRO. This is Orbit 12.19, and today I'm super excited. My name's Lisa, this is Jared. We're going to be interviewing Julien Lamamy from Ispace Europe. He's the managing director, and he was previously the engineering manager at Ispace, but before that, he was a systems engineer on the TESS mission, the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite. When he worked at Orbital ATK, and then he was the science plan implementer for the Mars Phoenix lander at JPL. So Julien has an extensive background in the aerospace industry, and we're thrilled to talk to Julien today. And my first question for you, Julien, is that you were inspired by the Sojourner landing on Mars. So then why did you choose to shift direction from Mars over to now the Moon, which is what Ispace is working on?
Yeah, good morning, or afternoon, I forgot which time zone you're on. That's a very good question, Lisa. Indeed, to me, people talking space business of the Apollo moment, what moment did drive you to join the space industry? For a lot of people older than I am, it's Apollo 11 landing on the moon. For me, it was the Mars Pathfinder mission in 1997. And the Sojourner rover, which was the first rover we used to explore the Martian surface. And after that, as you said, I worked on the Mars Phoenix lander. That was my first project actually at JPL, which was the first mission that landed at the Martian pole to confirm the presence of water. And why the moon now is because today, everybody who wants to join the space business has a really big opportunity to join space startups as opposed to large agencies such as NASA, ESA, and all that, to do really cool exploration. So the frontier is no longer the business of agencies; it's now the business of space startups like Ispace, Astrobotic, and so on. And the moon is, the first place of business. Mars, I think everybody has Mars, as the second phase of exploration for startups, but the moon is really right now the exciting place to be. Very soon.
So how did Ispace get started? Where exactly was the beginning of Ispace?
The very beginning of Ispace was actually a collaboration between the Dutch team and the Japanese team. The Dutch was supposed to do the lander part of the systems we need to go to the moon. The Japanese were doing the rover. And all that was initiated under the Google Lunar XPrize initiative. You're probably familiar with that. The Dutch part, the Dutch team, I think disintegrated, let's say. And then the Japanese team, which was called at the time Hakuto, continued on, and a year and a half ago finalized the full design of the rover, fully space qualified, and delivered it to Team Indus, which was back then the lander partner to send it to the moon. So it's almost 10 years old now. I think it's 9 years old. Wow. And it was started by Hakemada-san, and Hakemada-san is still the CEO today. He still interviews everybody in the company. So it's a really cool company. Same founder, same CEO, very approachable, and same vision.
So the Google Lunar XPrize, for those that may not be familiar, it was a $30 million incentive to land, for a private company to land something on the moon. And sadly, it actually went unclaimed. Nobody ended up winning the prize. I believe Team Hakuto was, their rover was finished, as far as I know. And you guys had kind of deals with other teams to use their landers to get to the moon. What kind of milestones did you guys reach with that?
Yeah, so after the Dutch team kind of didn't go through, we partnered with Astrobotic, so a similar startup in Pittsburgh. And they also pulled out because I think they foresaw that they wouldn't have the cash to make it to the end. For many teams, getting the launch contract was the big hurdle. That's a big down payment in terms of cash. So after Astrobotic, we joined with Team Indus. And all the way to the end, we thought Team Indus was not going to be able to give us a ride to the moon, which would have been very cool because they had their rover, we had our rover. It would have been a nice little race to see who can, do the first 500 meters on the moon. Unfortunately, in January 2018, they announced they couldn't make it either. And I think a month after that, as you said, the XPrize was canceled. So that's the downside. The silver lining is that all those teams are still active today. Astrobotic, XPrize, Part-Time Scientist, Ispace. Most recently, everybody saw Space IL, the attempt to land on the moon, which was really cool. So the Google XPrize still did its job of really creating a worldwide momentum for commercial space companies to go to the moon. And the completion of our rover as part of that program enabled us to raise $95 million to get into the lander business. Because for us, that was the big lesson learned is, okay, we need our own transportation system. We can't depend on other people if we want to be a standalone business.
So the Google Lunar XPrize didn't end up getting claimed. But with Team Hakuto turning into Ispace, what were some of the lessons that you took from your Google Lunar XPrize experience and sort of continued that as you're working? So what were some of the positives that you got, even though the Google Lunar XPrize didn't end up actually being as successful as was expected?
Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned, first finishing the rover, there's always lessons learned. When you go through a flight project end to end through space qualification. So there's technical lessons learned. As I mentioned, I think for the XPrize itself, the lesson was that if they were to do it again, they probably should give a free launch to one of the top 2 teams or something, because just getting the launch contract is very costly and cash intensive. The lesson for us, so when we raised the money for the lander, the $95 million, we right away secured 2 launches with SpaceX. So we have 2 launches on Falcon 9 already secured with that money. And the lesson there is, the lander is a key piece to establish really a business based on, lunar exploration. The first step is to establish the logistical business. So transporting payloads. Payload just means anything people are willing to pay for, from Earth to the moon. It can be for scientific purposes, for business purposes, for PR purposes, just like CubeSats. We really hope to be able to generate a new wave of university involvement and commercial involvement like the CubeSats have done for Earth observation.
I think you've raised a really important point here, is that the Google and XPrize wasn't a complete failure. There was all these teams that were inspired to formulate their engineering and also come up with business plans of how to live on after the Google Lunar XPrize was finished. And I know you guys are working on some really cool stuff. You mentioned you've got the over $90 million of funding and you've got 2 launch contracts. So, that is, I think, more than some of the other former Google Lunar XPrize teams have at the moment. And we will get into the current projects that you guys are working on. But before we do, the last thing I want to mention about the XPrize is, are you guys still, do you still have good relationships with the other teams that were part of that program? So like Part-Time Scientists, Astrobotic, Team Indus, do you still work with them at all?
As far as I know, so I joined Ispace right at the end of Google Lunar XPrize, so I wasn't part of the company when there was what you could call a competition, I guess, for the XPrize. In Europe, I'm in very good terms with Part-Time Scientists. It doesn't do you any good if you're the last man standing, because that means there's no business. The fact that Astrobotic and all these other companies are still around means there's people investing in them, which means there's a lot of people thinking, still believing there's a business to be done by establishing, transportation service to the moon and back. So for now, I think competition is good, and this momentum is really good.
Perfect. So can you give us a little bit of information then on after the Google Lunar XPrize, you raised the capital, you've got your launch contracts, but what are you actually going to send to the moon for those 2 SpaceX launches in 2020 and 2021?
That's a very good question. So we have the luxury that we could do the 2 missions on our own budget, if we really had to. Obviously, we're always looking for customers, even for the first demo missions. In Japan, they were able to get the first 3 customers, Japan Airline, NGK Spark Plugs, and I forgot MSA&D. Of those 3, one is an insurance company who's interested in insuring the first missions we do to the moon. So that's really interesting because people don't really think about insurance companies when they think about lunar exploration. But we're really excited about that because it really proves that it's not just, lunar exploration is not a game for space nerds. It's something that can be really valuable for any business on Earth. NGK spark plugs, they want to test some solid state batteries, some batteries that could survive really cold temperatures. So they're going to send a payload on that. And Japan Airlines is more partnership around the pre-launch phase where they would help us, do the logistics on the ground to enable the integration and launch of the lander. We are the Team Draper involved in NASA CLIPS, the NASA Commercial Lunar Payload Service. We're also competing for the similar program in Europe, spearheaded by ESA. So we also look forward to launching agency payloads along with our commercial payloads on the first missions to the moon.
So the moon is it's becoming popular again with like Blue Moon, NASA's Artemis project, and other things like that. Do you have any collaborations planned outside of talking about just like working with ESA and those other groups you're working with? Are you gonna maybe like put one of your rovers on a Blue Moon lander, or do like data sharing with NASA, or throw data out there potentially just for anyone to play with?
I would love to get a call from Jeff Bezos.
Wouldn't we all?
Right now we are. Right now we already partnered in the US. We were selected by Draper Labs to join their team to compete for what now is called Artemis, what used to be called NASA CLIPS, so the Commercial Lunar Payload Service. So it's Draper, General Atomics, and Ispace and Space Flight Industries also. So we're really excited to be on this all-star team. Draper Labs, some of you may know, was involved in the Apollo program. They did the GNC software, which was a real feat back then. Just navigating the spacecraft from Earth to the moon was never been done before, and those guys pulled it off. So there's a lot of history also behind this team, and it's a combination of you cannot do more old space than Apollo and new space than Ispace. So we're really excited about that. The news should be coming out shortly, I think, for the first contracts from NASA. And I forgot your question. Oh, partnerships. And in Europe, we also, the European office is only 2 years old. So we're just now at a phase where we have a critical mass and are able to look for partners to do similar things.
So what are the biggest challenges for the first two missions? Is it sort of like actually getting to the moon, or is it like descent and landing, like Space IL showed us? That could be tricky as well. What are those really big challenges for those first two missions to the moon for Ispace?
So I think you are into the question on the technical side. My personal belief is that as the Google XPrize showed, going back to the moon on a commercial basis is not a technical problem, it's a financial problem. The reason why we haven't reached the moon yet, the new space startups, is because the level of funding is not large enough to enable the growth of a team that's sufficiently large to do the work that has to be done. In our case, we were lucky enough to have this Series A a year and a half ago, and the team grew from, I joined, we were 25, now we're close to 90. And that's about the size you need to do this project. Because we started a lander project much later than others who, did that under the Google XPrize, we had to catch up. So our strategy is more to do small scale landers, with 30 kilograms of payload mass as opposed to 100, 200, and also to be system integrators. So minimize the in-house developments and rely on really reliable suppliers that have done all the components you need for a lander, and just buy them and do the integration and testing. I think if I were to bet, why maybe the first few missions may fail, Space IL and others, it's a really time-intensive effort to do the proper verification of your system. You assemble it all, and then often you're crunched with time, and you just launch without going through really all the checks you need to do before you launch to make sure it's going to work. And doing this end-to-end testing to make sure that everything's going to work nicely together. You cannot do in a simulation. And it's costly in terms of time and resources, and this is warfare where it bites you in the end.
So we've
So
got
to me, that's the main challenge.
we've
Go
got a
ahead.
few images here of, you mentioned that the testing program is probably one of the hardest things to go through and verify that everything will work as it's meant to. So we've got a couple images here of some testing that the rover has actually gone through. I don't know if you're
Right.
able to speak to what is happening in these photos, but if you could you give us a rundown of what these tests are and why they might be important?
I can try. Yeah, yeah. Are you going to show pictures? Is what you said?
So this one I think is
Right.
vibration testing, potentially.
I'm not seeing anything, but yes, vibration testing is often one of the first regime of testing that any spacecraft goes through. You typically have, so all those tests. Oh, here we go. Yes, that kind of looks like a vibration test. All those tests are meant to replicate what's called the environments, the launch environments. And by launch environments, people mean like nature environments, but really the crazy hell that any spacecraft has to go through from launch until mostly separation from the spacecraft, from the launch vehicle. This would be thermal vacuum. So you want to shake the spacecraft like it's going to be shaken in the launch vehicle. You also want to do acoustic testing because there's a lot of acoustics in the fairing of the launch vehicle. And then the thermal vacuum is more for the actual after separation while you're in space. You get really hot when you're in the sun, and then suddenly you go in eclipse and you get really cold, like minus 150, 200 degrees Celsius. And that's a really tough operating environment to be in for a lot of components, electronics, and so on. So you do those tests early to make sure that things are going to work okay once you're in space. This looks like a little sandbox test. So that's mostly probably more for mobility. This is the Serato rover, so that's the flight model we had for the Google Lunar XPrize. That's probably a field test on one of the famous beaches in Japan, if I can see the picture. Yeah, you can see like Ispace really worked on the cool displays to make this a really interactive environment for operators and people who watch.
So, for a lot of what we're looking at, we see the images of the robots and the vehicles at work, and those sort of become like the faces or the symbols of that program. But
Right.
but really, it's the people behind the project that end up making it happen. And what does it take in order to grab this kind of talent from all over the world and kind of bring everyone together and get them to focus on a common goal, especially something as challenging as getting a vehicle to the moon and then having it operate on the surface of the moon? What's it take to do that?
So I think you touched on a really good aspect of Ispace, which is that it's very international. So the core of Ispace is in Tokyo. So this is where we have most of the workforce working on the lander and the rover. And as you saw in some of those pictures, you saw John Walker on the last one. He's the chief engineer for the Serato rover. He comes from Canada. He did his PhD in Tohoku University, which is where a lot of the rover research came from for Ispace. We have people from France. We have people from Poland. I can't even name all the countries we have, but it's really, really amazing when you go into that office to see the diversity and everybody working together. In terms of the difficulty of bringing all these people to Japan to do this job, my experience in hiring in Europe is that we're very lucky to be able to say, hey, your job will be to work on something that will make exploration happen. That tends to be really, really motivating for a lot of people who do sometimes, marketing for some regular products or who do engineering on maybe just Earth observation missions, and they want to do something else that's a little more exciting. I want to be able to come back home to their kids and say, hey, guess what? I'm working on the moon now. So we've been very lucky in having a lot of really good candidates that are motivated to make the Ispace vision happen. And those candidates, what's really exciting about the world of space today is that they come from everywhere. It's no longer the game of the US and Russia. It's really truly international.
I completely agree, and I think when you have a company with such a cool vision like going to the moon, you're going to draw in people. Well, hopefully, you draw in people from all different aspects of industry and make them realize that, you know, you can work in finance and go to the moon. You can be in PR and marketing and get a job on a company that's working towards getting us to the moon as well. And so I think that's incredibly important in getting like the whole of the world interested in actually having the moon as a place that they can go and a place that they can work on. So I think what your company is doing is a fantastic way to get so many more people into space and into exploration in general. But speaking of exploring space and the moon, we've got a question here from St. Alex in our chat room. And they want to talk about the experiments going on your rovers. And St. Alex wants to know, do you have any plans for ISRU experiments or in situ resource utilization experiments with any of your rovers?
That's a very good question, Alex. Thank you. And actually, that's nice because this is a bit of the role we have in Europe. As I mentioned, you know, Ispace Europe is only 2 years old, and we're not directly involved in the development of the lander and rover. You know, you can't really work on such projects remotely, or you know, with two offices so far apart. So what our identity in Europe is really to go and think about what are the technologies we need after we demonstrate transportation to the moon and access to the moon in order to enable the vision. And the vision being exploring, utilizing lunar resources to enable a new space economy and, you know, and human settlement on the moon. And the first step is exploration. Exploration in almost a mining sense, where you go and assess how much of the resource you're looking for there is, how difficult it is to extract and process. And the rover for that purpose is the perfect tool. So we are looking in Ispace Europe at using the Ispace rover to explore the lunar poles, where orbiters such as lunar reconnaissance orbiters and others have shown there's a very high likelihood that there's water there, trapped, you know, in cold traps and also in this close subsurface in the first top meter of the moon. And depending on what information you're looking for, in order to assess how much water there is, you know, you can use a neutron spectrometer. You can use some mass spectrometers if you do sample set collection. You also need radar information. So we are currently looking at, you know, what are the best instruments that we can put on our rovers to answer those questions. You know, we have detected hydrogen. Is it water or is it hydroxylose, OH? How much is there? And could we ever dream of extracting that water with our rovers, you know, with an arm and a scoop, for example, or a drill, and processing it down to water that could be you know, used by astronauts or used as fuel? We have a partnership with Imperial College in the UK, where one of our former interns, who became a full-time employee and is now doing his PhD in collaboration with Ispace, is looking at the beneficiation step. And beneficiation in the mining industry is once you extract your raw material, you want to augment the quantity of, you know, what you're interested in. So you get rid of all the waste and you just keep what you're interested in. On Earth, it uses a lot of water, a lot of nasty chemicals. On the moon, of course, you're not going to use water because that's what you're looking for. So there's a big challenge to this operation in vacuum, really cold environments, and low gravity. And we're really hopeful that the solution we find for this beneficiation on the moon will be helpful to, you know, improve operations on Earth by maybe reducing the amount of water we use, and therefore reducing the environmental impact of those mining operations.
And for in situ resource utilization, does it kind of change? You know, it changes the game, especially for like big operations, like if you're doing a crewed lunar base on the surface of the moon. But what does in situ resource utilization give as an advantage? Maybe an advantage over a big thing like that with a relatively smaller team like Ispace. What's the big advantages of that for you?
So this is maybe not the answer you were looking for, but I think as far as I see it, the presence of water as a key resource on the moon, and the possible, you know, exploration and use of that water gives us a business plan. And that's a key thing you need when you're seeking investments and trying to prove to people there's a long-term game there in returning to the moon, not just to send a few instruments and say goodbye like we did for Apollo, but really staying and establishing a new economy, a new business. And water, yes, it can be used for astronauts and all that, but that's not enough to do a business case. What you need is to show that you can use this water and use it as fuel for maybe satellites in geostationary orbit, or spacecraft that are looking maybe to go to Mars and other places. So that's a really key important. It's I think to me the number one importance of ISRU is saying we're not going there to do ISRU for the sake of ISRU. This is the means to a business which can sustain activity in the long term on the moon. Of course, human settlements will join in there. And there's probably other uses of minerals and metals on the moon that we haven't thought of yet.
So coming back to making Ispace financially stable, because you've explained why ISRU is so important on the moon. You've explained why water can be so important in terms of making that long-term economy. But I think there's a bit of a gap, right? Because you raised capital, and that's going to get you through the first kind of stage of getting to the moon and transporting yourself there. And then you're selling payload space, so that's another source of income that will get you through the first maybe second, third, fourth launch. And then way in the future, once you have the ability to extract the water, then you can use this water as a resource and use that for revenue. But what about in the middle where you're doing the transporting, but you don't quite have the ability to extract the water yet? Is there any plans to have a way to generate revenue in the middle section there so that you're sustainable long time? Like maybe any data products that you can sell to other people to kind of bolster your income so that Ispace is around for the long term?
I thought we had agreed on no tough questions.
Oh, sorry. It just came to me now, after what you were just saying.
No. I'm only joking, because that's obviously the question. And it's interesting you brought up data products, because that's exactly what we're doing. In 2 weeks, we'll have Dan, who's joining us from Google, actually, Bay Area, to build our data center in Europe. So Europe will be the place where we process all the data coming from the Ispace missions. That can be, engineering data from the rovers or landers. That can be scientific data from all the instruments we just talked about. It can also be, I think a big piece will be just mapping data. So we'll bring, LiDAR, stereo navigation cameras to do detailed mapping of the environment, the lunar surface, but also the subsurface. And because the key point is you have to localize yourself, and you have to localize where you're finding all those resources. So the mapping and localization is a key point of the data. And we plan to process all that data and market it for a specific niche. So the scientific industry probably will be the first one, because we understand their needs fairly well. We have a lunar geologist in our team, Abigail. So she knows, what the scientists are really interested in. We also would target the media industry for PR, AR, VR, whatever people are interested in. And also, obviously, the big target is the mining industry. Because resource utilization is what, the space people call what's called mining here on Earth. So there's a lot of know-how in mining that can be applied in space, and reversely. As I mentioned, technologies we'll develop for space can be reused for Earth to improve operations. We also have a mine planner who joined us from Australia a little less than a year ago, Carlos, whose job is to teach us about, what are the needs from the mining industry in terms, what are they used to see in terms of data products? How do you talk to a miner? They don't talk about, resources like we talk about resources. What they're really interested in are reserves. And reserves is the ore, the resource with an economic value, like a net present value, risk assessment, and so on. That's what they're interested in. So we are preparing today the standards by which we'll report the resources we explore on the moon. And we're preparing the data pipelines we'll use to process the data for the scientific community, media industry, mining industry, so that, yes, when we come to phase 2, in between transportation and utilization, we have very valuable data that we can market and generate new revenue, and hopefully that data is convincing to bring in other investors to say, okay, let's go to step 3 now. I understand sufficiently well the business opportunity based on all the resource and reserve evaluation that I'm willing to invest in step 3.
So we have a question from our chat room from Smokey Dirk talking about operational aspects of the mission. And Smokey Dirk is asking, barring any unexpected errors, what's the expected operational time for one of these missions?
Why can't I use a nickname? Okay. So as Lisa said, the plan with the $95 million we raised in Series A, well, that budget allowed us to book 2 launches with SpaceX, one in 2020 for an orbiter mission, and one in 2021 for the first landed mission. So that's really the timeline. So we're not talking science fiction, 2025, 2030. It's really around the corner. There's a lot of pressure in Japan to meet that schedule. If you look at the Artemis program, it's also very compelling. I think they start even, I forgot when the first launch date is, but if it's not 2019, it's 2020. And then they have 1 year, one launch after that, all the way to 2024, where they aim to have the first humans on the moon. The Chinese have gone there already, with Chang'e 4 early this year or late last year. And Chandrayaan is about to launch this year. So, it's happening, definitely happening.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that, a lot of people we talk to on the show, sometimes, they have these grand visions and they have a lot of talk and they have some cool PowerPoint slides, but, you guys, you're real, you've got the money, you've got 2 launches on the table, and you thankfully have this plan of how your revenue is going to change as you go, to enable you guys to actually get to the future, to get to a place where the lunar economy is generating revenue, that we're sending things to the moon all the time. So can you give us a little bit of insight into what Ispace's vision is once all these milestones have been reached, say like 2040? What are we going to see on the moon once Ispace has made lunar transportation a reality?
That's a very good question. I think we have this little, I think Ispace calls it Moon Valley, which is just, when I interviewed for Ispace, Hakan Manas and our CEO said, already back then, we're not going to the moon by ourselves, and that's not the point to go there by ourselves. We want to build an ecosystem of people that can use our transportation system and find new ways to use resources on the moon or the lunar environment to do really cool stuff. Maybe there's advances we could do in the pharma business, for example, because of the microgravity environment or vacuum environment. I don't know, but the whole point is really to enable a new economy, new ecosystem to develop, and that's the idea behind the Moon Valley, where every business is represented, in this lunar city, but I don't feel that we should be the one today answering this question. I think that's a question, if we were talking to kindergarten kids or, kids in middle school, I would say, we're doing the first phase of developing the infrastructure to get us back to the moon. And then you guys can do whatever you want. It's up to you in 10 years, 15 years to show us, hey, this is your tool that you developed is cool, but you're not using it the right way. This is how we can really do something super cool about the moon, ISLU, and all this. That's what I'm excited about, is to see, okay, what is the next generation going to come up with?
And for that next generation, they're going to be designing a lot of the things that end up going to the moon. And kind of, what are some of the ideas that you guys have for design? Because I know your rover has 4 wheels on it, and every rover that I've seen that's been in operation, like Sojourner, Spirit, Napi, and Curiosity, they've got the 6-wheel rocker bogie suspension on it. So, what are some of the things that you are looking forward to testing with that? Maybe not just with the rovers, but also like with landers and technology demonstrations.
Yeah, the 6-wheels ones, that was also my first reaction, coming from JPL. I mean, all those words you mentioned come from JPL, so they have one way of doing things. It's also from Mars. The 4-wheel rover has gone through extensive testing, so I'm actually really looking forward to to see it drive on the moon and prove itself as the lightest rover ever made on and to drive another celestial body. As I mentioned earlier, technologies will have to demonstrate. I mean, the first one will be, I think, the autonomous navigation, localization, and mapping. There's no GPS on the moon, but there's also a really strong need to know exactly where you are. So if you find your gold mine of water, you know exactly where it is, and you're able to get back there. And that's a tricky thing to do when you have very low data rates. Even though the moon is close, there's not a lot of spectrum that can be used commercially to talk to your robots. So you have to be really smart about how you use your bandwidth. And then the next big challenge is, getting to the resource. People have really, I think, a lot of questions about the nature of the regolith. The regolith is the lunar soil. How hard it is, how compact is it, how easy to drill, because if you want to do ISLU to some many kind of scales, you have to dig a little bit. So I think there'll be a lot of technology testing aimed at seeing, okay, how does the lunar regolith react? The Apollo astronauts had a really hard time, I think, boring. They had a hand tool to collect samples, and it was very painful, very difficult. So finding some smart ways to excavate resources would be very important. And then there's the whole processing chain. I talked about beneficiation earlier. That's only the first step. So yeah, there's many things that have to be worked. And again, it's an opportunity for a worldwide collaboration.
Yeah, I think, you raised some really good points there about questions that we just haven't been able to answer so far. Like, the regolith, what kind of drill do you need? Like, is it going to be hard? Is it going to be soft? Is it going to run into the same problem that the instrument on the InSight lander ran into, where they were kind of trying to
that's a very good example.
And then there was like a boulder in the way, and now it's kind of stuck. Like, these are so many unanswered questions, and I think that's why it's so important for you guys. You've partnered with some mining companies, and that is so imperative, because I think there's so many lessons that they've already learned that we can take and use when we go and explore the moon. And then, like you mentioned, coming up with how do we convince the mining companies to get on board? What data products do they want, and what do they want to hear from you guys, so that you can get, you can kind of share, right? Like, you can give them this data that they want about, resources, like the miner's definition of resource, and then they can give you the knowledge of how to actually do the mining. And I think that's a fantastic partnership, and a really good way that, again, bringing in non-traditional space engineering folks into the fold. Like, you don't have to be an aerospace engineer. You can be a mining engineer, and come in and help us, make humanity live on a different planet.
Yeah, and I mean, the top mining school in the United States has already started essentially what would be an asteroid and planetary mining program. So it really isn't science fiction to think about mining and getting resources and reserves from these places. It's not just like a dream anymore. It's like people are learning right now how to do that, and it sounds like Ispace is definitely going to be enabling those people to do that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I want to go a little bit left field with this next question. We've talked about getting to the point of where we have all these resources, and maybe we have some people actually on the ground doing the mining and the next step processing after you bring that stuff out of the ground. So those people are going to have to work to some kind of schedule or timing, as humans have these 24-hour cycles of circadian rhythms that they work to. And you've had experience working on Mars time when you were working on the Phoenix lander at JPL. So my question is, what time zone do you think the first kind of moon village should be operating under?
Oh, the moon village. Oh, well, that's left field. Thank you. No, that's a very good question, because, working Mars time for the Mars Phoenix lander, I think, was my best experience so far. It was in Tucson. It was really great. You wake up at 3 a.m., you go clubbing, and then you go to work. It's quite unique. For the moon, on one hand, it's close enough that you can really talk to it whenever you want. There's only a 5-second delay or so. The limitation, though, is going to come from availability of your communication resources. spark to the moon. I mean, depending on your rates and also on, but let's say, there's a DSpace network, there's ESA as a student network, but there's only so many antennas you can use. Those antennas are really oversubscribed because they talk to a lot of spacecraft. And then in your spectrum allocation, spectrum for space is like really the most critical resource. You can't really talk that much. It's not like your high-speed internet. So in the creation of Moon Valley, I think by itself, you'll need a lot of investment in the communication infrastructure. People are already thinking about establishing constellations around the moon to provide, a communication architecture. And then in terms of time zone, that's actually a very good question, because the moon has this crazy cycle of, you have 14 days, you're super happy, you're in the sun, and then you have 14 days of lunar night. And then you get to minus 200 degrees C, and, unless you have access to nuclear power, you're really hard place to survive those 14 days without sun and really cold. I would almost, say, let's check out what I forgot what his name was, but the guy who wrote the Mars book, and then he wrote the Artemis book also for the moon, right?
Andy Weir.
What he assumed. Yeah, Andrew. I would say I'd be curious to know what he assumed in terms of local day-night cycle for the lunar settlers. Because right now I wouldn't have a better answer.
All right. Well, we've been talking a lot about the moon today. Julian, we're very glad to have had you come on the show today and talk a bit about Ispace and the work that's going on with that. But we're also, talking, giving away a little bit of the moon from our show here today, which is that we're working with the documentary Apollo 11. In case any of you got to see that in IMAX when it was released just a couple months ago, and also when it was in theaters for a little bit of a limited run that it had, we're partnering with them in order to give away a multitude of things. Not only do we have Apollo 11 Blu-rays, so maybe you can get your heart rate up to 140 like mine did in the IMAX movie theater with that. We're also giving away things like signed lithographs, theatrical posters, and also a Celestron telescope as well. So if you ever have wanted to look at the moon, here's your chance to do it with something a little better than your eyes. And the way that you enter for it is you take a photo of the moon, you post it to Twitter or Facebook, and put the hashtag #KeepLookingUp. Also, don't forget to tag tomorrow as well with that. And that'll get you entered, and then we'll be giving away those wonderful items very, very shortly. So very, very excited to be delivering that to you folks. And just, if you can go see Apollo 11 or you can get a copy of it, just go get it. It's just so darn good.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know what happens in it, but
no spoilers.
No
right?
spoilers, because it's already basically been spoiled. But that it's just so good. There's so much tension built up in it, and it's just a wonderful look into an incredible mission that really brought everybody back together for a little bit of time there, which was amazing.
So we're super excited to be able to do that for you all. But before we do let our guest go, 2 questions. Before we go. The first one is, where can people find out more information about Ispace, and maybe if they wanted to get involved, how can they get involved? How can they support, I guess if they want to work with you, what kind of jobs are you looking to recruit? Anything like that.
Good question. First, I want to go back to the keep looking up point. I think that's a really good initiative you guys are launching, because the moon does tend to be taken for granted, we see it up there, we don't really pay attention to it. And I think now with this new wave of, excitement coming from agencies, but also space startups, people really have to look at the moon and say, okay, it's a place where maybe, in 10 years I could go there, just like, now maybe the space tourism barrier is being broken down. The moon is next. And I think it's really exciting to look at the moon that way. Regarding more information about Ispace, we have a website that's it's pretty good, ispace-inc.com. And then in terms of jobs, all the jobs are listed there. But here in Europe, we're mostly looking for, as I said, data engineers to build our pipelines. Anybody who knows about mining is excited about space. Scientists to complement our Abby, our lunar geologist. And you're all regular, space engineers. But, as we've been discussing for the past 30 minutes, every discipline is needed. Business, marketing, legal.
Awesome. Well, yeah, hopefully if any of our viewers are interested in working for this really cool company that are, actually legitimately sending stuff to the moon, go and check it out. And hopefully, I hope you guys get some cool talent out of this. And the final thing I want to ask you is, why is space important to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for asking. Because when I was at JPL, I noticed a lot of the people there always had the story like, since I was 4, I was building rockets and this and that. And that's not been the case for me. I think I was really interested in actually, the moon, astrophysics, cosmology. And that on top of Sojourner, I think, bridge it together. In focusing on space engineering. But, my grandpa spent a lot of time actually talking about celestial telescope. We would go outside, look at the moon with telescope, look at planets, talk about the Big Bang, all those big questions. I just, kept that with me.
All right. Well, Julian, thank you so much for coming on today. We wish you as much success as possible at Ispace, and we're very much looking forward to seeing what you guys are going to do in the technology in the future that you're going to end up enabling on the moon.
Thank you, and thank you for promoting, all these great space adventures going on right now.
Right. And of course, we do also want to thank some more folks as well, our Patreon patrons. You folks, we can't do this show without you. So, if you really get something out of this show and you'd like to give something back, you can head on over to patreon.com/TMRO and do so. And, we've got some really cool things in the pipeline for our patron rewards, like the escape velocity level. We've got this new thing now where you can actually listen in to the audio loop really talking cool. Between the control room and us.
We have
here.
Ben in our ear being like,
yes.
do this, do that,
do
that. My bidding.
That was wrong. I'm right, the whole thing that Ben likes to do. So, yeah, we just heard from them there. So there's a multitude of things. We're also looking at giving out patches and other stuff when you reach a certain number at a certain level. Just really some cool stuff. So if you would like to financially help out tomorrow, you can head on over to patreon.com/TMRO and also subscribestar.com/TMRO. But even if you can't and you still want to help us out, one way you can do that, head over to community.tmro.tv. We got a multitude of ways for you to do that there. And also, just subscribe, like, notification bell, send it out, post it on Facebook, Twitter, MySpace if you still have it, who knows. So feel free to just get the word out about us and help make everyone as excited about spaceflight as we all are and as you are watching this show. So I think that wraps it up for 12.19. So we're out of here.
See
Y'all have a
week.
good one.
Bye.